Christmas Day, and then 2 games on Saturday. The late game has quarterback concerns with Lamar Jackson and Jordan Love, Baltimore and Green Bay. Not so much when it comes to Houston and L.A. Texans and Chargers, the early game of the NFL double. L.A. clinched a playoff berth on Monday thanks to the Colts' loss to the Niners. Texans do have a few paths to the playoffs, but the easiest is a win or tie this week. Let's discuss this Saturday game with the crew, and we'll get to Todd's take a little bit later because the look-ahead line was actually, I think, Houston -1.5, and then it flipped. A lot of it had to do with how the Texans played against the Raiders and the Chargers blowing it up against the Cowboys here. But, Pete, in terms of this game, because there's implications for both sides for Week 17 leading into Week 18 here, what interests you most about Texans and Chargers this week?
Well, this is like a mini playoff game.
This might be the best game this weekend, to be honest with you.
I mean, two physical defenses that get after it, and one team comes in limping a little bit on offense, and that's the Texans. They did not look good last week. Remember, they got a pick 6 for a touchdown.
Correct.
They did not move the ball on a bad Raiders defense, and that's a concern because they started to show life on offense, and all of a sudden you play a Raiders team and you don't show any life on offense. That's concerning to me. Now, Max Crosby was playing like a man possessed last week, and they couldn't block him. But they got to be better on the offensive side of the ball. The inconsistency is too much there for me. I think the Chargers' offensive line, they've shuffled guys around. Salyer's now settled in at left tackle. They seem to have grabbed onto that, and they didn't give up a sack last week. Herbert's moving well, getting in and out of the pocket. And I think they're going to be able to make some plays against that defense. Look, that defense is really good. Don't get me wrong. The Texans are great on defense. The Chargers are really good on defense. We forget that. And if you look at it, which offense is better? I'm going to go with the Chargers. I think the Chargers will show up and play well here.
This will be a defensive battle, and I'm looking at those offensive tackles that you talked about from the Chargers versus the bookends from the Houston Texans. I think that's where the game is going to be determined. When you look at it, it's probably going to be like a 14-10 game, right? Whoever doesn't make that pivotal mistake. You talked about Justin Herbert using his mobility more. We saw that a lot last week versus the Dallas Cowboys. But we were talking about this earlier, Jay, with the Broncos. That Texans defense didn't play up to the standard either last week, right? When you look at it, Ashton Jeanty kind of had his way with him, not only running the ball, but catching the ball out of the backfield too. And then Geno, after that first interception for that pick 6, he actually played really well against his defense, and you're not accustomed to seeing that. So I know this defense plays to a standard that they didn't play to last week. I know you talked about the offense, but I think the defense takes it up another step, and that's why the Houston Texans will win this game.
That was a classic trap game for the Texans last week. And one thing that's kind of been overlooked a little bit, the Texans tackles may not play in this game. Both left and right tackle may be out. And so you're talking about, Pete, this Chargers defense has been fantastic. And what happened in the playoffs last year when these two teams met? They embarrassed the Texans. They embarrassed the Chargers. Justin Herbert was sacked 4 times. He threw 4 interceptions. That was in their building. Now you're coming back into the Chargers building, and maybe the defense flips it on its head and takes advantage of this Texans offense that's struggling. Denzel Perryman not being there is bad for the run defense. This is not the team that takes advantage of that, though, because you have Woody Marks coming back. He's been good in terms of getting touches. He just has not been good in converting them into anything really productive. You have Jawar Jordan not playing well. Nick Chubb, I think, is going to be a mess. Really, fantasy-wise, the only guys I like are Nico Collins and Dalton Schultz been playing fantastic, so I think Stroud gets those guys involved, but I don't think Stroud has a big game. And then for the Chargers, I want to see a lot of Omari and Hampton. Last week, what we saw was fantastic to close the game. Kamani Vidal may not play. And so if you take Vidal out, they sign Jared Patterson off the practice squad. We could see Hassan Haskins, those guys as backups. Leave them on the bench. Play Hampton. He's gotten now 3 games under his belt from the foot injury. This could be a huge game for him. When running backs get a lot of work against the Texans defense, they're obviously very good at stopping the run. They still have big games. I like Omari and Hampton to have a big game this week.
I'm glad you mentioned that because we know the identity of the Chargers and what they truly want to be on offense with Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman. They want to run the football. And they haven't been able to a lot of the time because the guys haven't been in there. But Hampton started to look like himself.
He hit the edges last week in the fourth quarter.
I think,
again, it was Dallas, so take that into account.
But I still think the best way to neutralize pass rushers is to run right at him. And I think he's going to be a factor in this game. I really do.
And not only was it Dallas, guys, it was Dallas without Quinnen Williams to anchor that center of the defensive line. So it's something to keep in mind as well there. But look, here we are in 2025, and we have an over-under at 39.5, and Mother Nature will not have her say in deciding the winner of this particular football game. But Jamie mentioned the playoff game last year, and that hasn't been lost on Justin Herbert. He threw those 4 interceptions, finished that game 14-32, and it's a game that got away from the Chargers when they started off relatively quickly. I'm going to go back to where Justin Herbert, I think, doesn't need to have a full workload on his plate. I'm going to take him under 31.5 pass attempts. You guys mentioned the Chargers' DNA, and this may be the perfect matchup where they have to commit to running the football, keeping Justin Herbert out of harm's way against this tenacious Houston Texans pass rush. And even if they're in a negative game state, I don't think the Chargers are going to have to abandon the run. It does feel like the first team to 20 in this particular spot. You look at his over-under for passing yards that has been bet down to 213.5 after he had the flirtation with a 300-yard day last week. I think Justin Herbert ends up with 25 to 27 passing attempts here. The Chargers lean on the ground game, and Coach Harbaugh does everything he can to keep Herbert out of harm's way. Under passing attempts, in my opinion, the best bet you can make in this game.
I talked about it earlier, right? I think this game is going to be won and lost in the trenches. I think Todd hit the head right on the coffin, right? This is going to be a low-scoring match. I like the under in this game as well. But I'm going to lean on the Houston Texans. I just trust their defense a little bit more. Don't really trust those offensive tackles for the L.A. Chargers. Now, Justin Herbert has done a really good job. If something's not there, being able to use his mobility to get up into the pocket. But they're really good at stopping the run, even though Marion Hampton had a good game last week. I think the way that the Texans played versus the Raiders will wake them up. Let's not forget, they're still not in the playoffs yet, right? They haven't clinched a seed yet, so they need this game to clinch a seed. I like the Houston Texans. I know the line is flipped back and forth. It's almost a pick 'em right now. So if it is -1.5 for the Chargers, give me the +1.5 for the Texans.
I'm going the other way. I think the Chargers win this game. I think they run the ball. I think they neutralize those pass rushers by running the football. Herbert will hit some shots, and I love their defense. I think the way they're playing on defense is fantastic. You talk about defenses, their defense is playing as well as anybody
Justin
right
Miller's done
now.
a really good job.
So I'll take the Chargers. And by the way, next week, if you want a little peek ahead, I like the Chargers next week against the Broncos. They're going
at Mile High,
and they're going to win the division.
All right, well, the Packers' playoff hopes run through Lambeau this week, and if they beat the Ravens on Saturday, then
everywhere. Swagoo, thanks for making us all smile and laugh all year long. All right, let's talk about the Texans and Chargers playing on Saturday, and a lot on the line as the Chargers have clinched a playoff berth, but they can jump in the seeding while the Texans need to win to keep the upper hand for a wild card spot. So both quarterbacks will face some heavy lifting this weekend. The Texans and Chargers defenses have both stymied opposing passing games this season. Both teams ranked top 4 in the NFL in yards per game allowed, total QBR, and completion percentage on deep passes. They're also number 1 and 2 in touchdown interception ratio as the only teams with at least as many picks as touchdowns allowed. Marcus, what will you be watching in this matchup? This is a really good, interesting game.
Yeah. There is no secret to what the Houston Texans defense is, which is why I think Justin Herbert's legs is going to have to be a big part of what the Chargers have the ability to do from an offensive standpoint. And if he's real decisive in taking off, and I know the hand injury, but even when we were there in L.A. a few weeks ago, y'all, he decided to pull the ball down and run the football. We know what this pass rush is like with Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter, and this team comes up and hits. So I want Justin Herbert to get down after he gets his yardage. But there will be these critical third downs that happen. There will be the times where he obviously has to use his arm, but there'll be times where Derek Stingley and Lassiter will take things away, and Justin Herbert may have to pull it down and go get some yardage with his legs. I want to see how impactful that is as the game goes throughout.
Swagger, that's a great point because every team I talk to after they play Houston, they say the same thing, that we are beat dang up. They are the most physical team in the league. Every team says that. And so that's what's fascinating about this matchup because how much is Herbert going to run knowing that Houston doesn't really feel like they have to blitz a whole lot because they have those 2 elite pass rushers that come off the edge. And so Herbert, if he's tempted to run, they're just going to wait for him and then they're going to hit him 4 or 5 yards downfield with no problem. So he's had the hand injury issue. He's played beat up. We know he's tough, but how tough is he going to have to be to get through this game?
Yeah, it's funny, right? You see the Chargers and the Texans, and you immediately think, whoo, those offensive lines against those defenses. The difference, I would argue, is that the Texans' offensive line has been a little bit better this year. I'm not totally bought in, but you're seeing some improvement. They're able to actually pick up a blitz. And that's where I'm looking at this Chargers pass rush and looking at them to step up. Look, they're not the Texans pass rush. They don't have Will Anderson Jr. and Danielle Hunter. But they do have a pretty nasty 4-man rush. And ever since they traded for Odafe Owe back in Week 8, they are 4th league-wide in 4-man pressure rate. When Owe, Khalil Mack, and Tuli Pelotu are on the field together, they put Tuli inside, they're getting a 54% pressure rate, according to Next Gen Stats, which is very high. So, if I'm Houston, as much as that offensive line has improved, that is something that I am concerned about. I do think they need to find a way to run the ball against this team to try to keep CJ out of 3rd and long.
Yeah, the Texans have already won 10 games, for the 3rd straight season. That's a franchise record. They're also riding a 7-game win streak. So we'll see if they can continue that. We've got more coming.
And then you're the latest to have gone to the playoffs or gone to the Super Bowl. So I don't pay any attention to 30 years this, 20 years that, when I know one good year would change it all and you'd be at the top of the list.
Ooh, holly jolly here. Okay, the Cowboys and Commanders kick off the Christmas Day NFL slate. Jeremy, both teams have been eliminated from the playoffs. What changes could be coming for these teams?
Yeah, I like that jingle there.
Woo!
So Dallas and Washington, I don't expect them right now to make head coaching changes. Brian Schottenheimer is really well liked in Dallas. Dan Quinn, they've had a ton of injuries. It's sort of understood there that he will probably get a third season, but I could expect some changes on the staff. You look defensively. Joe Witt, the defensive coordinator in Washington, had his play calling duties relinquished. Dan Quinn has been handling that. Typically, that's a bad sign. And then in Dallas, there's a feeling there that, hey, we're probably a playoff team, if not for the defense continually giving up 30-plus points per game. So is there a change with Matt Eberflus? The D coordinator is now the question.
All right, let's go to the Lions facing the Vikings at 4:30 on Christmas Day. News just coming down recently on J.J. McCarthy. He has a hairline fracture in his hand, and he's out. Max Brosmer will start in this one. And Marcus, what do you want to see from Detroit as they hang on to their playoff hopes?
Yeah, Boogie, I want to see them get the run game going once again. They were stifled, obviously, against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Jahmyr Gibbs has been one of the proponents for this football team. Obviously, we know Jared Goff is much more comfortable when the play action is not dealing, and he had to get away from that a little bit because the run game wasn't working. Was still able to push the ball down the field and make some explosive plays, but I want to see this Detroit run game and this offensive line get back to some physicality.
The nightcap, the Broncos and Chiefs. Mina, what's something you have your eye on for Denver?
Yeah, I want to see Bo Nix and this offense get back on track. Obviously, on the other side of the ball, no Patrick Mahomes, so I would expect to see this Broncos defense play well. But coming across, off of a performance versus the Jags that was really up and down. You saw Bo hit on some throws downfield, but also missed some. You also saw the Broncos really struggle to convert in short yardage. That ended up being story of the game, 1 for 6 on 3rd and short. That has to change on a playoff run against Kansas City Chiefs. Good place to start.
Let's pivot now to the Panthers and the Buccaneers, whose only path to the playoffs is through the division. Carolina up a game, but Tampa has the tiebreaker. So here's how it shakes out. If the Panthers beat Seattle and the Bucs, lose to the Dolphins, Carolina clinches the